Please be seated.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I missed church last week because I had a prom to deal with,
Uh-huh.
but I'm so happy to see you. The scripture this morning is from John 10, verses 11 to 17. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you for reading, Taffy. It is good to be with you again. I was away last week at the annual gathering for the Alliance of Baptists in Evanston, Illinois. It was an intense time. It was a rewarding time. It was an exhausting time. And while I was up there doing whatever it is I was supposed to do up there, I know all of you were doing whatever it is you were supposed to do down here. And that includes having medical procedures, recovering at home, checking in on one another, and keeping the business that is necessary for our church to stay afloat. So it is good for each of us to be together today. And it is also okay to acknowledge if we're a little tired. Amen. Yeah. And it's overcast. I made it. But I'm just saying, it's like we just have to acknowledge that, that we are facing some particular challenges right now. And so then we have this text this morning that's about Jesus being the Good Shepherd. And most of us are familiar with this text. We've heard it many times before. And most of us have a painting somewhere in our past of bright and shiny Jesus holding the little baby lamb, and he has long blonde hair and everything is, But I mean, we grew up with that. So this image of Jesus as the Good Shepherd is something we're familiar with, even though, as we tend to do, we've cleaned the image up a lot. Because it's a peaceful image, right? But I want to remind you, first of all, of what had transpired right before this passage appears in John. Right before this passage is one of the miraculous healings of Jesus. The story tells us that there was a man who had been blind since birth. And Jesus, talked with him and asked if he wanted to be made whole. And so what Jesus did was he spat on the ground and he made mud. And he spread mud on the man's eyes and told him to go. And he went and he washed and he could see again. And he was overjoyed. And the word got around. And people were rejoicing everywhere. And then the religious authorities said, hold up, wait a minute. Because Jesus had healed this man on the Sabbath. And although the man was overjoyed, the religious leaders were not overjoyed. It implied a loss of control to them. And so they relentlessly began to interrogate this man who had just had eyesight for, an hour or something. They interrogate him. Well, how did this happen? Who did this happen to? Why did it happen? And they even went so far as to drag his parents before them. Say, well, what do you know about your son and this blindness thing? And then the parents are like, look, he's a grown man. You ask him. My name is Bennett. I'm not in it. All righty? Yes. And so they continue to essentially browbeat this man, the religious fundamentalists, and this is something that is instructive for each of us. The religious fundamentalists, those who do not have flexibility, those who are not able to embrace the spirit of the law over the legalities of the law, they do their best to wring every drop of miraculous joy out of this man. Imagine how excited you would be if after a lifetime of a particular illness or infirmity, you suddenly were able to see when you had been blind, and right away there in your face saying, well, this can't be right, this can't be righteous, this can't be holy, this happened on the Sabbath. Who is this man? What do you know about him? Interrogating and browbeating. And we know that there are people in our country right now who perhaps have found liberation, hope, some sense of a future here, and they too have been rounded up and browbeaten, and their families have also been rounded up and brought before the courts or sent to internment camps. We know how narrow fundamentalism that is not rooted in love can take all of the joy and the liberation out of being a child of God. He had been blessed with a free and righteous gift, and yet he ended up being persecuted for righteousness' sake. Who is this man Jesus to you, and what do you know about him? So that's the first thing we have to ask ourselves. Who is this man Jesus to you, and what do you know about him? The man goes on to say, well, I don't know that much about him. He says, all I know is I was blind, but now I see. Amen. You see, rather sometimes than trying to prove God or to argue God or anything, you can simply give voice to what God has done in your life, the ways that grace has manifested in your life, speaking into positivity rather than telling people who they are, what they're doing wrong. And so as they have been browbeating this man and everything, that's when Jesus stands up and says into this situation, okay, let me tell you who I am. Stop asking him. Stop beating on him. Let me tell you who I am. And this is where Jesus begins a series of I am statements. And we know that that relates directly back to our Creator God, right? I am that I am. So Jesus makes these I am declarations, and this is one of them. And in this passage, it's very interesting. One of the other things that we tend to do with Scripture is we treat it like it's an IKEA instruction manual, right? This screw goes here, and this shelf goes here, and if you put all of the things in the right place, well, then you've built something that is sturdy. But that's not always the way that Jesus portrays himself. In this particular passage, if it's read in its entirety, he says, I am the gatekeeper. Then he says, I am the gate. Then farther down, he says, I am the shepherd. You see, you can't pin Jesus into one box. Jesus is like, I am all of these things, all of which provide access and wholeness. I am the good shepherd, and I am all about the sheep. I'm all about keeping the sheep safe, about leading them, about protecting them, about feeding them, about comforting them when they are frightened. Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd, not the boss man, not the landowner, but the one who's out there every day, sleeves rolled up, smelling like sheep lanolin, tending and carry. Not beautifully coiffed hair, not a glowing white robe. A shepherd wears the clothing of the keeper, the lover. See, shepherding is not a high status gig. It never was. Being a shepherd did not mean that you had wealth or land. Most shepherds during this time weren't even like grown land-owning men. Many shepherds were women. Daughters, unmarried daughters, wives. They were often the ones who tended the flock, who carried them from pasture to pasture. They were the ones whose voice the sheep knew. Women, younger children, remember David? David was the youngest child because the youngest children were often like trained in that way of doing. And sometimes it was someone who was an enslaved person, an extended member of the family. But it was not someone who had privilege. And I think that's important for us to remember. They were just regular people doing work that didn't turn heads. It was quiet work. It was humble work. Kind of like parenting, right? Sometimes dirty, always necessary. Amen. But here's the thing. Jesus is the good shepherd because sheep need that kind of shepherd. And as much as we want to claim our sufficiency in all things, we're not always brave. Sheep aren't brave. They're not brave. They're jumpy. Sheep are skittish. Sheep worry. Sheep will stampede. If one starts running, they're like, oh, something must be going on, and everybody else goes with them, right? Sheep often lose their way. Sometimes they topple into ditches, and sometimes they roll over on their backs and they can't turn back over and get up. And so there they are, legs in the air, flailing. And it is the shepherd who goes over and grabs the sheep and helps it to right itself again, because the sheep can absolutely suffocate if they roll on their back and aren't able to expand their lungs. And sheep, although they may have some size to them, they are prey animals. They are vulnerable to attack by wolves and dogs and other predators. How many of you could name a few wolves, dogs, and predators that are vexing your current situation right now, right? You see, no matter where we look, there is something about which we can become anxious. We're anxious about the war. We're anxious about the cost of living when expenses are going up and raises aren't forthcoming. We're anxious about our health concerns or the concerns of those we love. We are anxious about our future employment worries. We're anxious about AI. We are an anxious, skittish people right now. Amen. And often when people are anxious, they revert to, again, blind obedience based in fear. But that is not the way that Jesus leads us. Amen. You know, I was at the Alliance of Baptists gathering last week, and I think I had shared with you that recently there was a change in the top leadership positions of the Alliance. It caught a lot of people off guard. It is something that we cannot disclose a lot of information or details about because of reasons of confidentiality and things like that. And so at the Alliance gathering last week, people were anxious, and they were confused, and they were angry at the board, and we were not able to give them the answers that they wanted in that moment. And I just saw a lot of anxiety, and I heard a lot of bah! And I don't mean that dismissively, because their concerns are valid, but the answers are not coming as quickly as perhaps they would like them to. But we're anxious, and we're running in circles, and we're beating, knocking up against each other, going bah, bah, bah. Here at WPBC, within the last, month, we have several people who have had surgeries. Ken, who I think of as an extended member of WPBC, he goes in for surgery a couple of days now. And ask that we continue to pray for him. We've had hospitalizations. It's just a time of disruption. Will it always be that way? No, because I believe that these people will eventually heal. Shirley, your presence with us today, again, gives us hope that all things can come full circle. And so it's wonderful to see you again. But we've got that going on, and it causes us some anxiety. And then we've got the challenge of not having air conditioning in our sanctuary this summer. And so there are many of us in this church who are busy seeking options for that, whether it be install cooling downstairs, whether it be move short-term to another location. But again, it's time sensitive, it's something that we have to do, and it causes some anxiety. Bah! And without the shepherd, we'd be lost. Even with the shepherd, we could be lost. If we don't choose to hear the shepherd's voice, if we don't choose to do what the shepherd directs us to do. You see, the shepherd's presence is meant to calm us down. Just being in his presence can make all the difference. Being in his presence, hearing his voice, doing what he instructs us. And what does he instruct us? Well, Psalm 23, that good old shepherding psalm, says he makes me lie down in green pastures. That's the instruction in times of anxiety. Don't run around willy-nilly. Don't flip over on your back so you can't get up again, right? Start out by allowing God to lead you beside cool waters, right? And make you lay down in green pastures. And that's just not a nice image we can meditate on. That is about soul rest. That kind of rest that comes when we know someone's got our back. That's why children can sleep so deeply, right? They have that sense of assurance that somebody's got their back. Mom, Dad, somebody's got their back. Well, somebody has our back too. And it is the one who calls our name and says, come, and before you freak out, rest. And maybe you won't even have to freak out after that. You see, Jesus did not pick a fancy image or talk about the estate owners and the big shots, the ones who have all of the wealth and the power and the capital to attack any obstacle that might come their way. That is not who Jesus is here. That's not who he talks about. He talked about shepherds because the crowd he was preaching to, plain old folk like you and I, knew what that meant to be a shepherd. Because they were the workers who were scraping by. They were the workers who were looking after someone else's flock and loved each of them and knew them by name. They knew that type of relationship that a good shepherd has with the sheep. Because he says not all shepherds are good. Some are just in it for the money, they don't care. But he says, but I'm a good shepherd. I see you, I hear you, I come when you call, I care for you, and I lead you into rest. And Jesus meets us right where we are, right where life is ordinary and uncertain and often tough. And he says, I am with you. Lo, I am with you always. And I will say that as I continue to walk through this life and as I am less and less certain of my own strength and my own ability, the gift of knowing that God accompanies me becomes that much more precious. We do not walk alone. We do not strive alone. We do not love alone. We do not suffer hardship alone. God is with us. So yeah, this sermon today is short and sweet because there's nothing that I could say that's going to give you any jolt in the arm wisdom that's going to give you great clarity. The clarity that I give you today is simply this. Learn how to rest in times of stress. Take a deep breath before you run off half-cocked. And start every day with just a few intentional minutes of contemplation, grounding yourself in the goodness of God, even if it's nothing more than saying, okay, Jesus, here we go. It's you and me. Even if it's just saying, this is the day that the Lord has made, and I will find a way to be glad and rejoice in it. Even if it's just a whispered prayer that says, walk with me, Lord. He is the good shepherd. He listens for our voice. He says that we know his voice. He leads us into the quiet places, and he restores our soul. When you are exhausted, when you are frightened, when you are concerned, when you are feeling hopeless, overwhelmed, when you feel like you've messed up and it cannot be repaired, God promises that God will restore your soul. So let him, allow him, follow where he leads, and learn how to rest rather than panic. Exhale, feel the love of God. And this is the word of the Lord for the people of God. Amen. Thanks be to God. Amen.